Welcome to the Daily Dawg podcast. Today is Saturday, November 1st, and it is game day in Jacksonville, Florida, for the world's largest outdoor cocktail party. The Georgia-Florida series, not the Florida-Georgia series, the Georgia-Florida series renews today for not the 103rd time, but the 104th time as Georgia takes on Florida in Jacksonville in the big rivalry game. Now, this rivalry game, as we've talked about, maybe lost a little bit of luster. We've kind of this week gone through the numbers, and we haven't done a lot of breakdown because we talked about the fact that with Billy Napier being fired, we don't really have a track record of a coach. We have Billy Gonzalez, the wide receivers coach, who's kind of followed around the Mullen and Meyer coaching tree. He was in Utah, and then he was at Florida, and then he was back at Florida with Mullen, and then he came back this year. He's got some experience as a wide receivers coach, as an offensive play caller, offensive coordinator, and passing game coordinator, and now he's taking over for the interim as the interim head coach. And I don't think this is somebody who's very likely. I'm not trying to knock Billy Gonzalez. He's put in a career working and coaching in college football, and he's obviously been successful enough to keep doing that and do that at some high-profile teams, especially Florida. This is his third or fourth stint back at Florida. But he's not very likely, I would seem, to be one of the candidates that's going to be taking over for Florida. I think Florida's going to demand some sort of level of success. And of course, there's a lot of programs out there right now. We've talked about, the LSU job is open, the Penn State job is open. Coaches are getting fired every week. I mentioned, and I saw this on game day, they were highlighting the same idea that, there's over $160 million in coaching buyout money out there now for all the fired coaches. So, but Billy Gonzalez has taken over this team, and we don't have anything really to go on at this point. I mean, we can even look at the numbers and what Florida's done so far this year, but there's plenty of reason to think that while they can't revamp the team entirely, they did have an off week. So, this is an interesting position. Florida fires their coach. The interim coach takes over. They have an off week. So they have essentially 2 weeks now to put together, a revamped team. I mentioned already, I don't think that this is a team that was I don't think this was a team that wasn't following their coach. I don't think they had tuned out the coach. They were playing hard. Especially when you see a team that plays as well as Florida's been playing this year defensively. They've been terrible offensively, but defensively, they've played really well this year. And when a team plays well defensively, that's Kirby Smart has said it before. Defense is often about preparation and effort. So, I mean, you have to know what you're doing. You have to be in the right position. That's a bit of coaching, but you also have to put a lot of effort. I mean, defense is just wanting it a lot of times more than the other guy. You got to follow them. You got to track them down. You got to be willing to tackle. Tackling is a big part of it. Kirby talks about that. So you got to be in the right position. Then you've got to make the effort to get there fast and come hard, and then bring your guy down. Don't just arm tackle him. Don't just olay him. And that's what you see a lot of. And that's one of the reasons that Georgia has always been a consistently strong defensive team. Obviously, Kirby Smart is a defensive-minded guy as a coach. And this year, you might scoff when I say a strong defensive team, but yeah, the team has given up yards and points in key moments. And what we've really seen is these sort of starts. We keep talking about the idea of the fast start, and Georgia's often seemingly getting off to a slow start. But I've really kind of, in my mind, taken this to the idea of saying, look, I think what's really happening is that Georgia is very consistent. Georgia plays the Georgia brand of football week in and week out. Georgia, basically, the philosophy that Kirby and his staff take into games is we're going to do what we're going to do, and we're going to out-execute you. We're going to beat you man on man. Each of the 11 guys are going to line up and try to beat the guy in front of them. We've got talent. We don't have the kind of talent that we've had in the 21 and 22 teams, as we keep talking about. But also, as we talked about this week, when you look at things like the 24/7 sports talent index that they put together, at least based on recruits, high school recruits, it doesn't, it does actually. I mean, it does deal with transfer portal because, for instance, I read through the list of some of the key players that are listed in our talent composite mix, and Zachariah Branch is listed as the fifth highest rated designated guy coming out of high school. So, even though he transferred in the portal, we still have his stats as from when he was recruited coming out of high school and what kind of level of talent he was thought to be. And that pretty much fits, right? You look at what he did in his freshman year at USC, and then he comes here to Georgia. And while his numbers are not explosive in the sense that, he's not leading the nation in receiving and kick returns, and, he's also playing week in and week out in the SEC in a tough conference, and he is being used a lot. We are putting him on punt returns. We're putting him on kick returns. He's been used both as a possession receiver and sometimes as a downfield, more explosive receiver. We've also used him on jet sweeps and some run play and a lot of screen passes where he's able to get the ball on the edge and then make somebody miss. And we've seen him make explosive plays out of a 5-yard play. A couple times this season, he's taken the ball to the house, 37, 46-yard touchdowns. Probably plays that could have been 80-yard touchdowns had he made the same play on the other side of the field. And so Zachariah Branch is certainly living up to the hype and his recruiting. Recruiting is it's more of an art than it is a science, as much as everybody tries to make it that. And just because you have the most 5 stars and the most 4 stars or the highest ranked recruits doesn't mean you're going to be the winning team. Everybody knows that. But there is a sort of what I might call a preponderance of evidence, right? So in Georgia, Alabama, Ohio State, Texas, over the last several years, they've had that preponderance of evidence where they've been leading the nation in recruiting with the highest level recruits, and you see that the results generally do pay off on the field. So, and obviously, every recruit doesn't pan out, but if you have 100 4- and 5-star recruits on your team, and that's an overstatement, the talent index that we read out and looked at this week, again from 24/7 Sports, shows Georgia having, according to their numbers, 70 5- and 4-star players, about 13 5-star players and 57 4-star players. So, out of You take, I think, like 84. I think you're allowed to take 88. You're allowed to have somewhere in the 80s on scholarship. You're allowed to take roughly 70-something to 80-something players on the road when you go on the road. When you're at home, you can dress out anybody who's on your team. And so sometimes you'll see 120, 130 guys on the sideline dressed out at home for home games because you have guys that are essentially practice squad. You have guys that are 3rd, 4th, and 5th string, depending on what kind of game it is, they might get into that. But so the core idea here is you talk about having 70, your team has 74 or 5-star players on the team. That's the bulk of your play roster, the roster that you're really playing with week in and week out, right? Because that you look at the number of players that you're allowed to take on the road, that's kind of your core roster, not everybody you dress out. And so 70 is, 80, 90% of the number of players you're allowed to take on a road game. And Georgia has just that number in 4- and 5-star players. Look, all of them aren't on the field. All of them haven't taken off. Everybody develops at a different level. But again, my point being the preponderance of evidence. When you have that many players that you can fill out essentially your entire roster with highly ranked recruits, then the number of those that will pan out is in your favor. It's I guess you might think of it as like buying more lottery tickets, right? If you want to, and I'm not endorsing the lottery, by the way, or saying I'm not knocking the lottery. Do what you want to do. It's your choice. But I'm just using the analogy, and I want to be clear about that, that a lot of times people think when they see a big lottery, they want to buy more tickets. And buying more tickets does increase your odds. It increases them infinitesimally when you're talking about a lottery, right? Because there's the odds are based on the numbers. And so if you pick different numbers on different lottery tickets, the average lottery now has something like 275 million combinations. So that's the odds, 1 in 275 million. It's not how many people buy the tickets. It's how many number combinations are there. So obviously a football roster is not that deep. If your football roster, if your core roster is 85, 90 players that you're rotating in and playing with your core roster, then obviously that's a much smaller number than 275 million. But my point being is if you've got, you look at teams out there that have 30 or 40 blue chippers, and so we'll just narrow it down, 5-star, 4-star players, we call those blue chippers. And so if you've got 40 blue chippers on your roster, then that could be enough. I mean, that's enough to have two full basically an entire starting offense and defense and even a second set, an entire second string offense and defense. So you could have nothing but first and second string players on offense and defense, both teams essentially, with nothing but blue chippers if you had 40 blue chippers on your roster. But that's not likely if you had 40, because again, they're not all going to pan out, right? If half of those kids pan out to be top level players that are high level contributors for you, then you're talking about having 20. And so now if you spread 20 out, well, you might have maybe your first string players on both offense and defense are all blue chippers. But by the time you get to your second string guys, you're down to some guys who are, maybe not as highly talented or as physically talented a player. And that's really what recruiting is based on, right? It's based on your physical talent. So a lot of people outdo their physical talents. Go back to Ladd McConkey. Ladd McConkey was a player who wasn't even really a 3-star player. Most recruiting services gave him a 3-star when Georgia offered him a scholarship. And they figured, oh, well, wait a minute. If Georgia's offering him a scholarship and he takes that, we're going to look like idiots if we didn't at least give him a 3-star. So they gave him a third star. He wasn't even a 3-star player when he was recruited. Now, what is he? He's playing exceedingly well in the NFL after being, what we can tell without him on the team, was a key cog in the Georgia teams that won back-to-back national championships. And even the 2023 team that went 12-0 in the regular season and had a shot for a three-peat. A lot of people think that one of the reasons that team sputtered at the end is that both Ladd McConkey and Brock Bowers were injured. And so even though they played in the SEC championship game against Alabama that we lost and eliminated us from the playoff consideration that year, their play was diminished. They were not as big a factor. And the team looked shakier in the games that they missed because both of those guys were injured. So, yeah, Ladd McConkey is a good example of you can become an elite player even though your physical stature, your physical person, which is mostly what recruiting rankings are built on. And I mean, they consider how the guys play and what's their intelligence, their football IQ, all of that factors in. But the first and foremost thing that most people are looking at in the recruiting rankings is they're looking at, what's the physical attributes of this player? Does this player have the ability to physically dominate the game? What's their speed? What's their size? What's their catch radius? What's their range? What's their all those kind of things. What's their strength? And so, again, recruiting's not the science, but my point being that, if recruiting matters, it matters in totality. And that's what Georgia, that's what Alabama, Texas, Ohio State over the last 10, 15 years, and through all time, but you've just seen a big difference in the last 10, 15 years before NIL and portal and paying players directly from the university. Before that started to really change things, that's what the name of the game was. That's what we've been talking about, these eras and how things have changed, right? So Georgia, Ohio State, Texas, Alabama were able to amass 70, 80, 90 blue chip players. And so from that pool, if half of them pan out, you can have an entire first, second, maybe even some third string players that are all blue chip players, all people of immense physical capabilities. Then you add in passion, heart, energy, football IQ, and just, great adapting to the coaching and learning the scheme and playing well. You put all that together and you just have this sort of dominant team that's hard to beat. And that's what you saw. That's what we had. And now we're piecing together, well, what do we have right now? We still have, like we talked about coming in this game with Florida today, we still have 70 blue chippers on our roster, and Florida has 52. So we have a significant percentage higher. We have like 30, 35%, maybe more talented team if you're just indexing the blue chippers in terms of raw talent and potential. And so that's going to make a difference. That's going to show up on the field because, again, certain number of those players, if the same number of players basically pan out across all of football, and that's one of the big things. You ask, what does a coach do? One of the key things a coach does is develop players, right? Kirby Smart has shown that a huge number of these guys who have been blue chip players actually get onto the field, star, and then go on to the NFL. And that's what drives this recruiting. That's why people keep coming, is they know that they are making smart business decisions for their future, regardless of the NIL and portal time before and even now. Yes, you can make money now in college, but you're going to make even more money if you are a successful NFL starter for 4, 5, 6 years. And that's the lifespan, by the way, of an average NFL starter these days, is somewhere between 4 and 6 years. So, but if you can be a first, second, or third rounder and play for 4, 5, 6 years in the NFL, the amount of money that you're going to get is significantly higher than what you could get just from an NIL deal at a campus. But, again, no knock to these kids. Get both, right? Why not? Get paid to play. If you can get $2-3 million to play when you're in college, and then you can get $20 million to play in the pros, that's even better, right? More money, more power to you. I wouldn't turn it down. So anyway, we're summing up the topics coming into this week, because now it's time to get to our final predictions. And we're going to try and keep this one short today. It's already Saturday morning. It's time to get into getting ready for the game today at 3:30. And so I want you to have a chance to hear this, see what the predictions are, and think about it. My point when I first started out was to say, look, we're not going to be able to go blow by blow. Like what does the coach do versus what is Kirby Smart doing? What have we seen this year? We can tell what's happened on the field with the Gators, but there's a decent chance. Look, I guess what I was trying to get at, there's only so much, and here's where the talent thing comes into play. I'm sure Billy Gonzalez has taken this 2 weeks to try to revamp the team as much as he can. But think about it like renovating a house. Think of it like one of those contest TV shows, right? Or maybe one of the chef shows or something like that, if you watch any of those. I haven't watched a lot of those, but my family, people like them, and I've seen a bunch of them. So you have these shows where they come on and they're renovating a house, and it's a contest maybe between two teams, right? And they have 2 weeks to renovate the house and then put it up for sale and see who makes the most profit. Or the chef shows where, if you had all the time in the world to sit down and cook a gourmet meal, a lot can probably produce a really great meal. But one of the reasons they do this contest, if you really want to be a chef, if you're in a kitchen in a restaurant, you have to be able to produce dozens or maybe even hundreds of meals in a really fast time frame. People aren't going to sit there all night and wait for you, 2-3 hours to cook this world-class meal. You go visit your mother, and your mother says, sit down, let's talk, whatever. And you visit, and she spends 2 hours producing the best meal you've had in a year. Well, A, that's your mother, and B, you're visiting, but you're not visiting with the chef. The chef has to spit this stuff out. So the contest is to see, hey, can you take these ingredients under this circumstance with this time, and can you, spit out, the best meal possible? And then they judge it and they say, well, here's the winner, who won this contest. So Billy Gonzalez, my point is Billy Gonzalez is kind of like in one of these contests right now, right? He's not in a position, he does not have the authority and the power to revamp the program. If he's hired as the coach, and again, I don't think he's probably going to be, but if he was hired in the offseason as the new Florida coach, well, then he can revamp the offensive and defensive coaching staffs. He can revamp the roster. He can go out in the portal and change players. He can recruit new players. He can encourage players that he doesn't think have a future with his team going forward to go. He can take guys that are maybe on the team that he didn't think the previous staff were utilizing enough, and he can try to pull them into higher positions. And you can write a new playbook, both offensive and defensive. You can change your schemes. These are all things you do in the offseason. Well, you have 2 weeks. You can't do all that, okay? But you can do some things. You can add some plays to the playbook. You can change some plays. You can change some of the order of who's doing what on the staff. And again, they've had staff changes, right? So, all of a sudden you got people coming, going. Everybody's got to figure out what they're doing. They're starting to think about, their future, their jobs elsewhere. All of a sudden all these coaching jobs are opening up around football, and maybe they're going to get a chance to go to a different school and a new program. So there's a lot for these guys to think about. But Billy Gonzalez's job this week is to try to wrangle all that together and say, look, we have to try to do what we can. Doing what we were doing got the head coach fired. Okay. Doing what we're doing is not working. We're 3-4. We have a losing record. And I think I saw a stat on game day that said, Florida's got a losing record this late in the season, or at this point in the season, for the first time since 2017. So again, things are, this is why Billy Napier is being fired. Like I said, if you go back, actually, Dan Mullen had some good seasons and had them, they finished number 6, number 7 in the country in the postseason AP poll, in 2 of Dan Mullen's years, right? So Dan Mullen was not an abject failure, but the point that we talked about in the last day or two, or last podcast or two, was that when Florida did get the better of Georgia, go to the SEC championship game, play Alabama, they were not competitive. It didn't look like they were on level with Alabama. So it felt like sort of a token effort. And I think Florida people rightly saw it that way. They weren't just like, oh, you should be happy, made the SEC championship one, you won 11 games or 10 games. They looked at it and they said, look, and the predominant idea was that Dan Mullen was not recruiting enough people, high level people. I mean, his career, what he had really shown is that at Mississippi State is he's an excellent, X's and O's coach, right? He could scheme out a way for lesser talented people to win the games. And he kind of seemed to be feeling like that was more the MO. And at Florida wants a program that looks like what Georgia's looked like for the last 5 years, what Florida looked like 20 years or 35 years ago. We talked about how you go back 35 years ago you start at the 1990 season. For the next 1920 seasons, Florida is as dominant in that 20-year stretch as any team in college football history. 3 national championships, 7 SEC championships, almost 80% winning percentage. Just fantastic effort. And that spans more. That's not just Steve Spurrier. That spans, the Ron Zook era, which was very mediocre, but then gets to the Urban Meyer era, which in some ways is even more impressive than the Steve Spurrier era, because Urban Meyer has a couple 13-win seasons and he wins 2 national championships. So this is who Florida is for that time period. And so they're not accepting this. They're not accepting it. Instead of getting better, Mullen was not taking it to a higher level. So they bring in Napier. Well, Napier did one thing really well, is that Dan Mullen wasn't doing. And so I give him credit. That's smart, right? If you're going to take over from somebody, and you know that what was the chief criticism, well, by gosh, it makes sure that what you do is you accomplish fixing what was the chief criticism. And the chief criticism was that Mullen was just not willing to get out on the recruiting trail and fight hard for the recruiting and the players. And so, yes, he could scheme and win games, but then when you got to the championship level, he couldn't win those games because they were against other coaches like Nick Saban, who can also scheme and coach really well and know how to put together a game plan, right? But then also has a roster of superior talent. So Florida has upgraded their talent. They've gone from being maybe 25th, 35th, somewhere between 20 and 30, low or maybe high teens in terms of talent base. Right now, their talent index puts them about the 12th most talented team in the country. So again, this is scary. I mean, yes, there's a big gap between 1 and 12, which is, Georgia in terms of talent and Florida in terms of talent right now by that index I keep talking about. But the gap between 1 and 12 is not so big as to say, look, you can just go out there and just guaranteed win because you're number 1 and they're number 12. That's close enough together. That's why we talk about the top 25. The realistic expectation is any team that's in the top 25 could be good enough talent-wise, overall talent-wise, to beat on any given day with a good game plan, a few breaks their way, a little extra fire, passion, and energy, or a little less fire, passion, energy from the other team. Depending on how things go, they can win that game. And or maybe they take that step up. Maybe their kids, their talent steps up to another level and starts to execute at a higher level. And we find out, look, maybe they were underrated. So, you got to be within striking distance, though. You had to have that talent. And Billy Napier's improved the talent. So the team that we're going to face today is a talented roster, but again, less talented than the Georgia roster. So just on roster alone, they're not going to beat us. And just on coaching alone, things have not been working. What's not been working primarily has been the offense. The offense is only averaging 22.4 points a game, 7 games into the season for Florida. And that's abysmal. High 20s is, but not great. I mean, look, if you're going to be a team that's really going to compete, win 9, 10, 11 games, have a shot at the playoff, have a shot at your conference, championship in almost any conference in this sport right now, you've got to be able to put 30 points a game on the board. Georgia's doing that. We're averaging 33 points a game. You look at teams like Tennessee, they're putting, much more, 40, 50 points a game on the board. So you've got to be able to do that if you're going to expect to win, no matter how good your defense is. You can't just go out there, and especially once upon a time in college football, offenses were not as sophisticated. But you look up and down you look up and down the the rosters of college football right now, and you look at BYU. BYU has an exciting young quarterback. The quarterback they had last year, who was very exciting, is now at Tulane, and Tulane is playing well. So there's talented guys out there offensively who can throw the ball, who can play the ball, who can lead the teams, all up and down the levels of college football. So you can't just roll a defense out there and just hold on to the ball and play defense and score a few points and expect to win in today's college football. You've got to be able to score about 30 points on average if you think you're going to be a 9+ win, a contender type team. And so Florida hasn't been able to do that. So look, Billy Gonzalez is an offensive coach by nature, wide receiver coach, offensive passing coordinator, offensive coordinator. That's the kind of coach he is. And we're going to assume that, he's taken some time this week to put in, again, he can't revamp the whole offense. He can't bring in players they don't have. He can't get a whole new coaching staff. He can't write a new playbook. But he can put in some plays. And this is also an area of concern for us because, again, this is what we've seen is that teams, I think, not, coaching staffs that are good, but people I wouldn't even necessarily say, oh man, these are some of the best coaches in the country. A lot of teams we played this year. Again, Hugh Freeze's staff was able to go, and I'm not saying Hugh Freeze is a good coach, and I said that coming into it. They were able to look at what Georgia does and what they do, and they're very limited on offense as well. And this is a good comparison. The Auburn game and the Florida game for us is a good comparison. Auburn is very limited offensively. They were supposed to be better. They were hoping to get more out of bringing in Jackson Arnold. They had some wide receivers they thought were going to be stepping up to a high level, and they've traditionally got a good running game. Turns out their offensive line, which had experience coming into the year, has let them down, and they're getting sacked all over the place, and Jackson Arnold's on the run, and that's been difficult. We've already covered that. We already played that. But just to remind you what's going on there, well, Auburn is down near the bottom third in scoring and offense and everything too, and that's where Florida is. Florida's only averaging 366 yards a game offensively and only 22 points a game. So we can expect that Billy Gonzalez is going to look at what they do well, what they think Lagway can do. They've got a couple emerging wide receivers. They have a running back I mentioned who's number 4 in the SEC, averaging close to 90 yards a game. He's got over 600 yards on the season. And so they're going to look at the combinations of maybe guys they haven't used enough, the wide receivers they have, the quarterback they have, Lagway, who's a 5-star quarterback and shows a tremendous amount of arm talent. He's been prone to a lot of mistakes. He's thrown 9 touchdowns and 9 interceptions. So, and I think that Billy Napier would probably tell you he was trying to work around having a young offense and a young quarterback and try to keep it conservative and not make too many mistakes. They are out possessing teams. They've been averaging 32, about 31 and a half minutes of possession. So they're in the upper level of possessing the ball more than half the time. So I think, I haven't watched a ton of Florida games, but that's the sense I have, is that Billy Napier knew he had a good defense. He had a young quarterback. He had some new young offensive pieces coming together, but not a ton of offensive talent. So I think his plan for much of the season was to lean on the defense, try to possess the ball and not make a lot of mistakes, and try to get enough points to be in the games and pull them out. And unfortunately, that didn't work. LSU game famously, Lagway ends up throwing 5 interceptions in the one game. But one of the things that always stood out for me from that game was he throws 5 interceptions, but he does that with they only lost 20-10. I've never hardly thought of a game where you throw 5 interceptions and you only lose by 10 points and the other team only scores 20. So again, defensively, they put in a lot of effort. And from an effort point of view, the team was playing for Billy Napier. So I don't expect that huge, oh my gosh, we're so relieved we got rid of this. LSU, there seems to, every day there seems to be more stories coming out. I saw a headline the other day. I don't know if this is true. I just saw the headline. Brian Kelly didn't even know the names of the LSU players. Okay. And we've definitely seen him yelling at coaches on the sideline, and he's obviously cantankerous in a lot of the press conferences and things like that we've seen him doing. So I think we could look at the LSU when they play their next game and say, hey, we may see a rejuvenated LSU team. We may see an LSU team who feels like they've been lifted up from a weight that was kind of put on them because maybe they really didn't like and they were not comfortable with the coaching staff and they were not responding to that coaching staff because they clearly had the talent, again, that people thought they had when they came into the season as a top 10 team and it eventually got up to be number 3 in the country this season. Now they're unranked and they fired their coach. So, but I don't, Florida wasn't that. Florida has been playing hard. They won 4 straight to close out the season last year, keep Billy Napier around this year. They, rose up and beat Texas. And look, right now, as we talked about, Florida is also a little dangerous. They've won 2 of their last 3. They beat Texas. They lost to Texas A&M on the road, and then they beat Mississippi State, although that was not an impressive way they won that game. So this is what I'm trying to get at. Look, Florida is going to be a little dangerous. Billy Gonzalez is probably going to try to cook up some stuff we haven't seen before. We have seen this year that this year's Georgia team is particularly susceptible to the fact that I feel like our coaching staff has not tried to break our own tendencies. We've tried to stick with that mantra that we've been doing for a long time and that's been very successful, that this is who we are and this is the game we play. And I think that other coaching staffs have been able to start these games both with some tendency breaking efforts. They've put in special plays and special scripting for the opening of their games on offense and defense against Georgia. They say, look, this is what Georgia's going to do offensively. Let's try to take it away by doing this defensively to start the game. This is what Georgia does defensively, and we know and we expect them to do that, and we don't think they're going to change. So this is what we're going to do to take advantage in the early part of the game. We'll try to jump out and get a lead, and we're going to do these things. I think Auburn, where you could really see it, was, again, a great example of that. Tennessee and Alabama have talented offenses, talented quarterbacks. They can put up points against a lot of people, but Auburn was a bad offense so far this year, hasn't worked together right. Offensive line hasn't been good, but they put together a good game plan. They used a combination of wide receiver screens and jet sweeps and short passes and quick throws. They worked it. They had an off week before playing us as well, so they worked hard on getting Jackson Arnold. You could see, and the announcers who have the ability to get some insight from the coaches during the week leading up to the game and then can share some of that insight as the game goes on, because now it's not a secret, it's being unfolded. So again, announcers are given a little bit of insight from the coaches about, hey, this is what we're going to try to do during the game. And in fairness, they don't talk about it till it starts to develop on the field. But then they're not just making that up out of nowhere. They were told that. They came and met with the coaches during the week, right? So the announcers were talking about how they worked with Jackson Arnold to make him make decisions quicker. Just get to the back, 1, 2, 3, throw the ball. 1, 2, 3, throw the ball. Just don't spend a lot of time on it. Find the quick read, make it simple for him, get the ball out. Most of his passes were, at or near the line of scrimmage. A complaint that we had about our offense a lot in the first games of the year, that all of our passes, all Gunner was doing was throwing down the line of scrimmage and making screen passes. But that's what they adjusted to. They adjusted to trying to attack Georgia on the edges, use speed, get their wide receivers out there, do some jet sweeps and handoffs to try to get the wide receivers into the run game and help possess the ball and break tendencies against themselves and put Georgia in some positions where they're going to have to adjust, where Georgia's going to want to stop the run up the middle, and play good coverage on the outside against the receivers. They changed it up. It worked. They ran up a couple hundred yards of offense in the first half, and as we all famously know, we got down to that fumble. And regardless of what you think about the fumble, simple fact of the matter is the ball came out of the goal line. But I think. We've said this before, but I can't, I guess, avoid saying it since I'm here. I think it was a great play. Either way, it was a great play by Georgia defenders, right? They knew what was coming. They targeted the ball. You see both Raylan Wilson and CJ Allen both going at the ball and punching the ball. They know they're not going to physically tackle Jackson Arnold before he gets in the end zone from that distance. So they're focused on what they've been told. They both make an effort to target the ball, keep their eyes on it, punch the ball out. Whether the ball broke the plane or didn't break the plane, no matter what you think about that call, it was good coaching and it was good execution by the Georgia players. Even if they had failed, even if the Auburn had been awarded the touchdown, I'm still impressed that they knew what to do in that moment and they didn't waste their energy just trying to tackle somebody who's already in the end zone. They focused on punching the ball out. So point though here in talking about it is, look, that was a razor thin play. Could have gone either way. And it went Georgia's way and the touchdown was prevented. But the simple fact of the matter is Auburn ran up 220 yards. And if that ball goes in the end zone or they don't, fumble the ball, I forget the down. I don't remember if that was a fourth down. I think it was a third down. If they had decided to kick a field goal, they could have kicked a field goal, gone up 13-0. If they get the touchdown, they're up 17-0. So again, their early game plan executed really well. It also was very limited, and they're a limited team. There was just so much they could do. So once our defense, our coaches, our players started adjusting to what they're doing, trying to get the ball on the outside, short screen passes, then, they adjusted to what the defense, we started getting more pressure on Jackson Arnold. We started shutting down those screen passes to the outside. You didn't see any more of the wide receiver screens. The run game became less and less effective. And the net result is they only gained 40 yards in the entire second half. And so, this is the problem we're facing today is how much can Florida come out and bust tendencies? They're talented enough to be dangerous. Okay. That's our first point. They're not on our level of talent. We are significantly more talented, 20, 30%. If you were putting a number on it, maybe more. But they are talented enough. They are a top 15 level talent team. So if they can put it together, they can be a dangerous team. They are a better bunch of players than their 3-4 record suggests, which is another reason why Billy Napier is gone. Okay. So number two, what are they going to do in this game? Well, we have been susceptible all year to the fact that we just don't have, without the overwhelming talent we have had compared to other teams in the past, we don't have as much of the ability to just dominate games doing what we do, mano a mano. Just like, hey, we're going to run our game, you run your game, and we'll just beat you. We are ultimately, we're number 5 in the country. We've won 6 of 7 games. We've only lost to Alabama, which might be the best team in the country by 3 points, and we should have won that game. All things I'm repeating over and over again, right? So, I think our resume says, look, we're, again, by the comparison of this standard, not the comparison of previous years, we are a top 5, top 10 team, and we've executed like that. So, but it doesn't look like what we've used to. And one of the disadvantages, and I would like to see the coaching staff find a way to respond to this, is it does feel like teams are really taking advantage of saying, look, we know what Georgia's going to do to start the game offensively and defensively. And that's where I think other teams are really getting part of this hot start. And then you see it change as the game goes on, because the special things they're able to do in the beginning, we adjust to. And the special plays they came up with early in the game, they run out of. And there's only so much of that they were able to add. And as they fall back into their normal tendencies and we fall back into our normal tendencies, then Georgia's superior talent, execution, and effort start to pay off. And for the most part, that's worked out, but it feels a little scary and a little threatening watching it. And it makes you feel like, hey, why are we constantly down? So Florida's a team that might try to capitalize on that same thing. And they have the advantage of, we don't have any idea what they're going to do. Okay. So, but I think we can expect to see some effort to open up the game more on offense than they've done so far. I think we can expect to see them take some more chances, because what do they have to lose? Napier was probably playing it a little closer to the vest because he had everything to lose and he didn't want to get embarrassed. But the team is already, you're already a coaching staff of, from part of a fired staff, maybe not going to stick around, new people coming in. You've got nothing to lose if you're Billy Gonzalez and the guys that are coaching there now, right? So there's no reason why they won't go for it. The good news for Georgia is, so far when they've been forced to put the ball in riskier situations to try to gain more so far this year or not, DJ Lagway has been as talented as he is, and he looks like a phenomenal talent. There's almost no team in the country that wouldn't have been happy to have Lagway on their roster. But so far his development has been not up to the level that you might have hoped. Now, he's still very young, and he could end up being one of the best quarterbacks in the SEC down the road, and maybe better coaching for him will develop him better. Maybe that's one of the things that Napier didn't do well. We won't know until we see it change. But thus far, he's been a guy who's put the ball in harm's way. He's accounted for 9 touchdowns passing, but he's had 9 interceptions. So by comparison, Gunner has 10 touchdowns passing, but only 1 interception on the season. So Gunner's been exceptionally good at not putting the ball in harm's way. Lagway has been not so good. He's put the ball up in harm's way a lot. And chances are, if Florida takes more chances after just 2 weeks of try to open it up a lot, put in some new plays, and they're going to take some more chances after 2 weeks of trying to revamp and revitalize the team a little bit, chances are they'll have some success with that. And I bet we'll see them score some points and some yards and some key plays. But ultimately, they're probably likely to make mistakes as well, because that's who they were before, and there's just so much you can do. And so back to wrap up my analogy, like I said, like one of those contest shows, right? There's only, when you say, okay, we're going to give you 2 weeks and a limited budget, and we're going to say renovate this house and let's see who does the best. Well, you're not talking about a grand renovation that makes a palatial palace or a dream home out of a house, right? You're talking about a little paint here, a little covering up some flaws there, and that's what Billy Gonzalez is going to try to do. And ultimately, Georgia is still a very well-coached team, a very disciplined team, a team playing with fire, passion, energy, grit. Everybody in the country, all the talking heads and analysts agree that Georgia is probably the grittiest and toughest team in the country. Nothing, puts them in a place where it doesn't feel like they can come out and win the game. And so in the end, I think, the flow of this game, and I'm doing this a little differently. So just to state, I usually go through what we talk about the matchups. We do Georgia offense versus the other team's defense. We do Georgia defense versus the other team's offense, special teams, and coaching. Again, I'm kind of throwing most of that out today because I don't think that we can rely a lot on what the numbers said, and we don't know what the coaches were doing before. And so we're just going to have to sort of wing it like I'm talking about here. Like, this is where I think the flow of the game will go. Okay. So just to clear that up, in case you're wondering if we're getting that, I don't think we're going to do those. I will still I think true outcomes are still important, because they still, what I call my true outcomes, they still hone in what our gut feelings are to what are the real possibilities and make us consider sort of the math of what are the possibilities. So we'll get to that in a minute. I'm going through the matchups right now and saying, look, overall, the Georgia offense and Gunnar Stockton have been able to move the ball on anybody and everybody. It hasn't always been super dynamic, like, big plays down the field and ripping off, 30-yard runs and 40-yard passes, but it's been consistent. That's what Gunnar brings to the table. He takes very few lost yardage plays. There's very few plays that don't at least stay near or at the line of scrimmage or gain a few yards, which means that we're doing better this year than we did last year. We're back up into the mid 40s, 45, 46%, which is excellent at converting third downs, because more often than not, with Gunnar Stockton running the offense, the third down is third and reasonable. We have very few 3rd and 13. When you rely on a guy who drops back, and again, this is not a knock on Beck, but when your offense is going to be 60, 70% passing, which it was under Beck, and your run game wasn't strong like it wasn't last year, then it's very easy to find yourself in an offensive situation where you come out and you run a play and your guy is open and the quarterback just misses him. Or last year, one of the things we saw a lot is that the receiver just drops the ball, right? We led the nation in drops. So you run the right play, you get the right result, the ball's there, receiver drops it. Okay, well, now it's 2nd and 10, right? So now the defense knows you're going to try to, not be behind the chains. You're going to run a play, so maybe you got the running back lined up behind the quarterback in the shotgun, and it's a read option, and he's got the option to hand off the ball and try to get some yards. But the primary goal is, let's run this and see if we can get a few yards and make it a shorter third down. Well, defense knows that. They key on it, boom, all of a sudden 2-yard loss, right? Our run game wasn't great last year. So now all of a sudden you're facing 3rd and 12. Well, 3rd and 12, no matter who you are, is not, the statistics say you're going to convert that, 20, 25% of the time or less. So that put us in a situation where, we had that kind of flow happening in games a lot last year. So that's one of the reasons that our third down conversion percentage dropped, to under 40% last year for the first time in several years. And that was a big difference. And it also hurt our defense, right? So you go out and you have a lot of 3 and outs, you have a lot of short possessions. Even if ultimately you end up putting 400 yards and 35 points on the board, you still, when you do it in a shorter fashion, we talked about that with Tennessee's offense, you put your defense on the field more. And you give the other team more chances to score, which draws them closer together. You reduce their chances to score, you maximize yours, you obviously spread apart, right? You control the game more. So Georgia's back to controlling the game a lot better this year. They're doing they're possessing the ball at a high level. Number 9 in the country in time of possession. We are, grinding out. We're back. We're back to over almost 200 yards a game rushing, and Gunnar Stockton is a big part of that. We have sort of a 3-headed monster with, you got Chauncey Bowens, Nate Frazier, and Gunnar Stockton are your 3 leading rushers. And so they all have, Gunnar's got, I think, 279 yards. The other 2 guys have a little over 300 and something. So nobody's really just blowing you away with, like home run, 50-yard, look at them go kind of runs, but they're consistently grinding out yards. We've been averaging over 200 yards a game most of the season. The last game or 2, we had against Auburn, we actually didn't end up putting a lot of yards on, and we took a really low number, and that ultimately changed the average. But point is, look, we're averaging 190 yards. We're close to 200 yards a game. That's getting back to where Georgia's been. And same thing on defense. The defense has not been, they're not creating a lot of turnovers. They're not creating, they're giving up more yards passing than we're used to seeing, but they have really clamped back down. They're back to holding teams on average under 100 yards rushing. We are consistently taking away the run from almost every team we play. And even if they gain some yards, like Tennessee got 120 yards when we played Ole Miss, I think had about 140 yards total. I forget which one it is. We can look at it in a second. But whichever it is, but for the most part, Georgia has been able to hold teams below. Ole Miss was averaging over 200 yards. Tennessee was averaging over 200 yards. So even if a team has gotten 120, 140 yards, we've been holding them significantly below their average, and we've generally continued to get our average. So we're grinding the game down. We're possessing the ball. We're scoring at a pretty high rate. We're efficiently, like last game, we scored on 8 of 8 offensive drives where we were trying to score, right? Not just taking a knee. So we scored, and so we've been scoring efficiently, and we've been holding onto the ball, and we've been reducing the other team's chances. And so the downside is sometimes when you shorten the game like that, like the game against Ole Miss, both teams really only ended up as offensive as a game. And you rarely see this, right? Like it's 43-35 was the final score. But both teams only ended up with 8 and 9 off possessions in the game. Usually, I've talked about this before, 10-13 is more average in today's football. You go back a few years ago when the offensive era really exploded, you would see teams getting anywhere from 12 to 15 possessions in a game. So that's come down a little bit because of some of the rule changes. And so 10-13 is more common, but Georgia's been shrinking that even more. And part of what happens is if you don't stop the other team consistently when they have the ball. So, Ole Miss scored on 5 of their 8 possessions. Thankfully, the last 3 times they had the ball, Georgia 3 and out. This is Ole Miss did against the Georgia defense. And then they gained a first down or 2, but basically, just a few plays, and then they lost the ball on downs, trying to get, some desperation plays to see if they could find a way to get a touchdown 2-point conversion, tie the game up. So the Georgia defense did create 3 stops out of 8 drives, which is not what you'd want it to be. You'd want to see if the other team has the ball. You want to hold the other team to less than half the time they touch the ball, right? That would be the key goal. And so the Georgia defense hasn't been able to do that, but most of that damage has been in the first half. Teams have been able to do what I was just talking about, take advantage of Georgia's known tendencies, come out with some new things. We've played several teams like Auburn, and now we're playing Florida again. Of course, we had the off week, but so does Florida. So we keep playing teams in this situation where they have the opportunity to come in off the off week, the Alabama game, off week for both teams. But again, Alabama is able to come in and say, okay, let's scheme to take over the first part of this game. They do that, and Georgia's able to push it back and dominate the second half, but wasn't enough for the comeback because Alabama is just too good a team to get behind like that and expect to win, because you're only going to have very slim chances. But Georgia against Tennessee could have stretched the lead out much bigger. I mentioned the Ole Miss game in the end because we settled for so many 3 field goals in the game on our 8 drives. When you look at the stats, Georgia could have easily won that game by 14, 15, 17 points, the way the game flow and the stats went, if we had not only stopped 1 or 2 more of their drives, maybe just 1 more of their drives, and kicked 1 or 2 less field goals. Could have easily been a 17-point win, the way Georgia controlled that game when you look at the stats, outgaining Ole Miss by 160 yards almost in the game. So what's going to happen in this game? What's going to happen today? Again, I think what's going to happen is I think what I said. I think you're going to see some early firepower again. I think it's going to be frustrating because we're all getting sort of tired of watching teams take it to us at the beginning. But again, that's their setup here, right? They've had 2 weeks to do a quick fixer-upper. They're going to put some paint and lips or lipstick on the pig, and they're going to have some new shiny toys. They're going to come out with a few plays. They're probably going to run some trick plays. They're probably going to pull a few things, and Georgia's going to be in its defense that it starts in. And Georgia's goal is usually to start the game playing solid defense, see what they're doing, and then react to it, and then clamp it down, And so, they'll probably throw some punches. They'll probably try to be a little fired up, but they'll also probably open the game up and make a few more mistakes. So I think ultimately Georgia, which is a little better turnover margin team than Florida, not significantly. Florida's a -3 team coming into this game. Georgia's a -1 team. But I've made this point before. That -1 is a little deceptive because there's a couple turnovers from Georgia in that number. We're really more like an even team or maybe slightly positive because think about like the play at the end of the Tennessee for the first half of the Tennessee game where we put Ryan Puglisi in there because of his strong arm to throw a Hail Mary basically because we have the ball right before the half. You're down to a few seconds and you're out of field goal range. So you just say, look, let's put our strong arm quarterback in there and throw a Hail Mary. If we get a ball right at the end zone or get a tip ball, get into the end zone, great. We can stretch the lead here. Or actually take the lead because we were actually still behind at the half against Tennessee, 21-17. So that's sort of a no harm, no foul turnover where you're like, there's no reason not to give that a go. And we've had a couple of those this year where we had backups in, we're giving them a chance, or we're just trying for something that you might as well. And a couple of turnovers came in those situations. So when you look at the second team offense, defense combination, I would say that I forgot what the exact number is, but I think they've been able to play football more like a +1, +2 turnover ratio. So Florida's a -3 team on the season. Lagway has been inconsistent at being able to not avoid throwing it to the other team. And so I think if they open it up and they try for some things, I think they're not ready for the big time. And I think they'll get some I think they'll hit a couple and I think they'll miss a couple or turn the ball over a few times. And there's nothing that Billy Gonzalez is going to do in this 2-week time frame that's going to radically change the fact that they average 360 yards a game and 22 points. And I don't think as good as they are defensively, I don't think that those numbers will hold up as far as keeping Georgia down to a level where Florida could actually come out on top and win the game. Now, Florida did manage to put 29 points up in some fashion, and I didn't go back and review what they did against Texas, and I probably should have to say, how did they get to 29 points? I don't know if there was turnovers. And Texas is a bad offense, okay, nowhere near as good as Georgia's offense, and that's an interesting comparison to think about, right? I mean, Gunnar Stockton ends up being the quarterback. The recruiting time, Arch Manning would be our starting quarterback now, you would think, or that would have been the expectation had we won the recruiting battle that came down to Georgia, Alabama, Texas, and it seemed to be Texas and Georgia right at the end, and he chose Texas, and everybody's like, oh, we lost the chance at Arch Manning. Well, here's Gunnar Stockton, who we did get, and who always wanted to be a Bulldog. There's a great story. Sad story about how Gunnar Stockton's grandpa, who he was close with, died at the Georgia-Florida game 15 years ago, had a heart attack, was talking about Todd Grantham, the defensive coordinator, with somebody, and then just keeled over. And so Gunnar always finds this motivating to think about his grandfather and how he was a big Bulldog fan in this game. And I think that's only going to help Gunnar Stockton play a more motivated, really good game today, right? So I think the offense, I think Florida has a good defense, but statistically, Georgia is a better defense, unbelievably, right? I mean, Florida's averaging giving up about 330 something yards a game. Georgia about 313. Georgia's holding teams to a little under 20 points a game. Florida's giving up right at 20 points a game. They're very close, but in the end, Some of that, again, may be that Florida has put their offense, has put their defense under great duress. But one thing Florida actually has done is possess the ball. And they do have a running back, like I said, who's got over 600 yards and is fourth in the conference in yards and yards per game. But they have leaned on him almost exclusively. He has over 600 yards rushing on the season. They don't even have 900 yards as a team. So he's got the bulk of that. Whereas Georgia's been averaging or has gained over 1,300 yards on the season, and they kind of spread it out. We have 4 guys that have 100 yards or more rushing. And again, we get the ball in the hands of people like Dylan Bell and others too. So we have a lot of dynamicism in that running attack. So I think the offense is going to put up a minimum of 27, 28 points. The Georgia offense against the Florida defense, I wouldn't be embarrassed by that because the Florida defense is that good. But I also think that the Florida offense is more likely to make mistakes, not possess the ball as well in this game, take a few more chances. And so I think Georgia actually gets over 30 in this game. And I don't think, the other thing I mentioned earlier in the week, and Florida has scored over 30 points in one game this season, and that was against Long Island University, okay, which is just it's like a high school team. They completely overmatched that team. And so otherwise, their best output was 29 points against Texas. And I just don't see Florida putting up 30 points against Georgia. I know we feel a little shaky about our defense, but in the end, our defense has got it done more than you would think. And I mentioned this earlier in last week and this week's podcast. You'd be surprised to realize that actually the Georgia defense this year is statistically better than last year's defense. So they are stopping the run better. They are maybe giving up a little more in the passing game, but they are better at stopping the run, and they're better overall in terms of yardage and points allowed so far. So, and I think one of the things that's exciting is they do have a chance to improve. We have seen flashes like the Ole Miss game. They're getting beat for a lot of the Ole Miss game, but Ole Miss had one busted play long touchdown, but Ole Miss was not consistently just gunning the ball down the field left and right. They were possessing the ball down the field, and that's part of what Georgia was able to do. And it complements what Georgia does on offense in terms of shortening the game, lessening the number of drives, and just making sure that we're really efficient. So unless we make a lot of mistakes, start turning the ball over, and take away our ability to score, take it away from ourselves on offense, however many possessions we have, I think that, this is a game where Georgia should be able to create some separation. And I said against Ole Miss, I thought maybe Ole Miss would be the game where we finally put it all together, play really well offensively and defensively. It didn't happen as much defensively, but offensively, it was definitely there. I think Gunner's going to be motivated. I think the offense plays well. My only big concern is Colby Young being out. He was our leading receiver in terms of yardage. I mean, you look at it and he's, we only had a couple guys that are averaging, they had 300 yards or more receiving, and he's one of them, one of two. But, it was encouraging that Lawson Lucky stepped up as big as he did, and the overall use of the tight ends. And I think that the offensive line coming together also just means this offense is going to get better and better. I think we've all been complaining about these screen passes and short plays and a lack of downfield big play passing. Some of that people have thought maybe Gunner can't do it. And look, maybe Gunner's not the best over the middle. He's definitely shown some great balls to the outside. Over the middle is not as consistent. I agree. And I think Aaron Murray has said that when he breaks down the games. But what I will say is that Gunner has had a very shaky, constantly changing offensive line. And our offensive line is as healthy as it's been all season. We should see guys like Ernest Green and Juan Gaston and Monroe Freeling, all these guys back and playing, along with these guys who've been playing, like Bo Hewley and I'm trying to think of one of the other younger guys. Starts with a G. I can't think of his name also. But anyway, we've had several young guys who've stepped up and played a lot. And look, at the end of the day, this is a lot on Gunner, but in most of these games, we're averaging over 420 yards a game. We're averaging over 30 something points a game. And in these big games, like last week against Ole Miss, against Tennessee, we've been able to go over 500 yards. We've been able to go over 400 yards in almost every game except for the Alabama game and the Auburn game. And the Auburn game was offensive. I struggle to call it a masterpiece, but I mean, they just possessed the ball. They were willing. Auburn has a really great defense, and they are just on the field too much too. And Georgia was just able to just keep possessing the ball all through the second half. It was a lot of 2, 3, 4 yard plays, but just constantly then getting to the third down and getting third and short and then making it, and then just keeping the ball and putting up just enough points to eke out, not eke out that game. I mean, in the end, Georgia ends up winning that game, by double digits. So, I mean, it's, it felt a little weird. It wasn't the game that we all wanted to see, but I think it was a stronger offensive game than we might have suspected, I guess, is what I was trying to say. When you look at it in the big picture, we end up winning that game by double digits. It was a 20-10 game. We probably could have put more points on the game, and Auburn did a good job early in the game. So, again, I think the Georgia offense is going to grind and push and maybe be a little more dynamic, actually, with the improved offensive line. I think we're going to continue. We're seeing those tight ends. And I think one of the reasons we're seeing the tight ends have a much bigger game, everybody's like, where are the tight ends? Where are the tight ends? Well, if you go back and look, I've noticed on some rewatches, look, the tight ends have been forced into blocking, line blocking, run blocking on virtually every play. And we needed that extra help with the tight ends being a part of the blocking scheme. And we still probably do, but I think the last game or two, you're seeing the tight ends all come out, and Oscar Delp has had more plays. Lawson Lucky has really exploded. We've seen multiple plays to tight ends, early in the game in the last couple games. And I think that's a result of the offensive line playing better and having a little more confidence in them. Now we're able to run some plays where we can free up the tight end, or, have them set like they're going to block and then release more, as opposed to actually stay in and block and make sure that we get an open lane or keep Gunner clean. So I think that's going to continue to help, and will help offset some of the loss of having lost Colby Young. Colby Young is more of a deep threat, but he also was able to possess the ball a lot. We're able to do a lot of screen passes to Colby Young where he gets the ball and he's not even open, but he just fought with strength and energy forward for, like 5 or 6 yards. So I think the offense is actually maybe going to be a little better today. Florida defense should be good, but I think the offense is going to get into the 30s. I think we're going to score on, more than half of our drives. And I think the defense, this might be the game where the defense is finally able to, after taking a few punches early from an excited Florida team that's going to put some new fun plays in, once we see what they're doing, force them into a mistake or two, maybe get a turnover or two, I think that we could see that, start to turn the favor. So I wrote a little board. I thought this would be fun. Here's a visual. I think this is what I think. I think Georgia wins. My gut instinct is it's like 31-17. I wrote down a couple other scores. I could see it being a little closer, like 29-24 or 27-14. If the defense really plays well, we could hold them to 10 to 14 points. If the defense is able to not give up so many big plays early, I think we could hold them to 10 to 14 points, maybe 13. If we get out to a lead, they might close it late. Maybe they get some offensive juice late and they make it back to a 1-score game after it's been a 2-score game most of the game. But I think that they may even lead. I mean, this may be another game where they're up 7-3 or 10-3 or even 13-3. Maybe if they do get to 13 or so, I could see them getting to, even 14. Maybe even 14-0. I just think our offense, I hope our offense does what it did against Ole Miss, which is that we don't have the gap where we're down like 14-0 or 10-0 early because the offense responds. I think they have a shot to come out and put up some points early and jump on us. But, we'll see where that goes. So in the end, I think we make the series 58-44-2, take a 14 over 500 record in that. I think this is our chance to win 5 in a row for the first time against the Gators since the 1978 to 1983 seasons, where we won 6 in a row. So again, this is, as much as we've turned the series around, this would still be our first chance to win just 5 in a row. And again, that shows you something about the Gators, right? We've got 9 in a row against Tennessee. We're 8 or 9 in a row now against Auburn. A lot of our big rivals outside of Alabama, we've been able to not just win, but win convincingly for several years now. And so the Florida series, though, is still close. Our best, we're on a 7 out of 8 run, but so far it's only 4 in a row. So I think that's how this game goes, and I think that's where we're going to leave it. Again, I think on true outcomes, I guess I'll just boil it down to, let's talk about those true outcomes. What are the true outcomes? Florida wins in a blowout. I don't see that under any circumstance. I mean, I'd put that at almost, I mean, I might put 10% because you never know what could happen in a game, right? But I mean, we would have to have 3 turnovers and our offense just, get completely overwhelmed, and they would have to play perfect on offense. I mean, I don't see how Florida could blow us out. They don't have enough dynamicism to do that. So I put that at maybe 10%. Georgia blows Florida out. I think we got a good chance. We could blow them out. I think it's not the likely scenario. I think still the most likely scenario. And I say, again, I define blowouts, as we've talked about before, as 3 scores or better. So I've got this as my gut instinct saying 31-17. So that's really just a 2-score game. That's a 14-point win. The FPI, Football Power Index, ESPN predicting models, computer models, all have us at about near an 80% chance to win. It started at a little over 80, and then it kind of shrunk to 79 point whatever. The line on the game has been pretty stubbornly 7.5 points the whole game, or the whole time. I'm surprised a little bit it's that low. I mean, I would have thought maybe more like 10 or 11 points, something like that, 9.5 points. But because that's kind of where I feel like the game is going. But so I think, the 40-50% chance probably still says it's a 1 or 2 score game. And I think that Georgia has a 60 or 70% chance, maybe 80% chance of winning the 1 or 2 score game. So I think, when you look at the true outcomes, so again, mathematically, we say, what's Florida's chance to win? What's the chance they could have a blowout against us? 0 to 10% tops. What's the chance we could blow them out? I would say it's as high as 35 or 40%. Okay. So 10% for them a blowout, 40% for us blowout. So then 50% chance that it's going to be a 1 or 2 score game. And I think Georgia has the 60 to 80% chance to win the 1 or 2 score game because they're more talented. They played better all season. They have more stable coaching staff. And, Florida would just have to do almost everything right to even win the close game, right? They're going to have to overcome not very good offensively. They're going to have to overcome being a little loose with the ball and turning the ball over a little much. They're going to have to force Georgia to do something Georgia really hasn't done all season, which is just not be able to move the ball or have a lot of turnovers. They would have to make us turn the ball over a lot, even to win a close game, I think. So, the only real chance I see for them to win the close game is that if they really get a super hot start, they do what Auburn couldn't do. They get up 17-0 at some point in the first half. And then their defense is good enough to just make it really hard for us to close that gap. We're able to score and bring it back and make it, like the Auburn game, or not the Auburn, the Alabama game, where it's a 3-point game, but we just can't make that last play, like the Alabama game. Like we're down there and we've got the chance, but we fail on the key play. If they could get it to that situation, that's how they could win the game. Because if they can just hold on to or protect the lead and force us to come down to 1 or 2 do or die plays to win the game, their defense is good enough to do that. So, but I think that we would have to help them a lot, I guess is what I'm saying. And we're going to have a 2 or 3 turnover game and they not have any turnovers for that to be, I just don't think I don't think they're going to just shut us down and be able to outscore us just like they score more than we do on the drives. That doesn't look likely. So that's where we usually look at the true outcomes and kind of bring it to mathematically. But like I said, this time I'm mostly just leaning on a gut prediction where I say, I think that the team's going to play well. I mean, they had the off week. They changed coaching staff. Well, we had the off week too, right? So we had a chance to get people healthy. We had a chance to sort of look at what we need to do, make some changes. We had a chance to see where our guys have developed. A lot of young guys have come on. We have a lot more confidence in. Before the season started, you didn't know how you felt about Gunnar Stockton. Now you know he's a dog, right? He makes things happen. He's a leader and he's gritty. You didn't know if Chauncey Bowens could be a guy who was a factor. You thought Nate Frazier was a factor in the running game. Chauncey Bowens is a factor. So now you got a 2-headed monster plus Gunnar back there in the running game, right? You didn't know for sure. We brought in some new wide receivers, but how's that going to go? Well, Colby Young being hurt is a real blow, but tight ends that we've been expecting to emerge for a long time are emerging. Delp and Lawson in particular. And Elias Williams has had a couple plays in there and they've been mixing him in more, right? So the tight end game is looking better. We're going to need that. But Zachariah Branch been amazing. He's just done whatever we've asked him to do. He's caught some deep passes, 20-yard downfield to make a big play, but he also, takes a screen pass and makes something out of nothing. And he's been he hasn't put up a ton of yards sometimes, but a lot of times we've handed him the ball with a lot of work for him to do to make yardage, and he's done that. So you'll see some games where he had 7, 8, 9 catches, but not over 100 yards. But that's because we've left him a lot of work to do. But he did what was necessary to get the first down and to help us win the game. So I think we're just going to continue, and maybe now Noah Thomas has that chance to emerge because he's been on the field, but Colby Young has gotten more of those snaps, and obviously Colby Young's not on the field right now. And London Humphreys has continued to be a possession guy who's a big time. So you look around and you say, look, there's a lot of different guys who can make plays, and I think we're just going to see that improve. And I'm sure that Bobo and the offensive staff have looked at what has happened so far in the season during this off week, just like Billy Gonzalez is trying to make some changes. Well, I'm sure our guys have said, hey, what are some new wrinkles we can put in based on how these guys have emerged, these playmakers I just talked about, how have they emerged going down the stretch? And I think we have seen some younger guys getting in on defense. Again, it was Horton who had the big tip to knock away the last play on 4th down against Ole Miss to end the game defensively. Last week. So I think we're seeing some of those young guys, Elijah Griffith and Horton and some of that who's a transfer, and we're seeing some of these guys step up, and we're getting more and more rotation out of the defense. So maybe we'll start to see the defense gel some more. Ellis Robinson had a lot of problems early in the season. Looked like a guy who's getting picked on, but in the end, he's got, he leads the team in interceptions, and he started showing up with 1 or 2 or 3 passes defended each game. And he seems to be gelling into that 5-star guy that we've been expecting him to be. So there's an upside on the defense. And hopefully down the stretch of the season, we'll see that. And I think today could be a game where we see that. This is a good chance for them to have been rested, make some adjustments, and attack an offense that is not a very good offense ultimately. So listen, I hope you have a great day. Hopefully this is, it's great to be a Gator hater. So it's great. I'm really hoping that we, again, extend this to the first of my lifetime fandom. Okay, I guess I was alive in 78 to 83, but I wasn't watching. So I'd be really excited to see us get that first 5-game win streak against the Gators and just keep pushing that series totals out. So let's hope it looks like if you're down there, I think it's a beautiful day, and I think it should be a great Bulldog day. So hope you enjoy it. Hope we all enjoy it. I got some thoughts about the playoff picture that I put together, but I might do that as a separate podcast or bring it into tomorrow and put together something either tomorrow or Monday. We'll try to get this back to a little more consistent. We've had some technical issues again this week, but we'll try to get it back. I'm really trying to get this to where we do the podcast Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and we put out some written content that backs it up during the week. So I appreciate you being with me. Spread the word. Let's bring more people into the conversation, and go Dogs.